W nowej erze wierzymy, że poprzez ciekawość, chęć uczenia się i odwagę korzystania z wiedzy można zmieniać siebie i świat. Wierzymy w każdego, kto chce się rozwijać. Człowiek jest tym, czego miał odwagę się nauczyć. Kiedy szukasz kierunku, dajemy inspirację i rozbudzamy ciekawość. Kiedy potrzebujesz wiedzy, zapewniamy materiały i narzędzia do efektywnej i wciągającej nauki. Kiedy przychodzi czas, aby wiedza sprawdzała się w praktyce, wspieramy inicjatywy i pomysły. Każdy, kto poprzez wiedzę i naukę chce zmieniać swój świat, jest dla nas ważny. Dlatego dbamy o najmniejszy szczegół w naszej ofercie. Wierzymy, że codziennie możesz nauczyć się czegoś, co rozpocznie nową erę Twojego życia. Twoja nowa era.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of my Matura Perspectives. In this webinar, I'll be talking about speaking, obviously from the perspective of Matura, but also from the more general pedagogic perspective. Before we start, however, I would like to refer back to our first webinar, which was mediation, because we've heard some voices from the teachers about this webinar, some of them polarizing, I have to say. There were teachers saying that, yes, we should be talking about mediation because this is the student's future, because this is something they'll have to learn how to deal with. And on the other hand, there were teachers saying that perhaps it's a little bit too early to talk about mediation at this stage because we don't know what the Matura will look like, especially mediation-based tasks. Myself, I think that it is the student's future, it is the teacher's future as well, so why not talk about it, why not look at it, why not try to prepare the students in advance to the tasks which have a really high pedagogic value. So, well, why not do it? But thanks for the voices anyway. This webinar is about speaking, so without further ado, let's do some screen sharing. Alright, so let's have a look at the agenda for the webinar. We're going to focus on Matura and Matura-like oral tasks in the first place. That's going to be the major aspects of the presentation of the webinar. Then, or in the meantime, I'll be talking about providing opportunities for practicing the skill, for practicing speaking in general. Matura, very important, but speaking as important. So it's not going to be just exam orientated, but mainly, but also going to look at how to practice speaking in general. Then the third important aspect of the webinar is how to endow the learners with the strategies which are necessary to pass the oral part. We know that the exam situation can be stressful for the learners, that they can underperform, so it's essential to equip them with a set of strategies that they might like to use and choose in the exam situation. And also how to enrich their lexical stock. Vocabulary is important, just like grammatical structures, but we're mainly focusing on how to enrich that vocabulary, the lexical stock, and by lexical stock I don't mean just individual words, but I mean different phrases and chunks, ready-made units of language, which can be useful in different parts of the oral Matura. Grammatical structures, there will be 2 or 3 activities where we're going to focus on how to practice grammatical structures with the learners, but this is not going to be the major concern of this presentation, the major aspect of this presentation. So we're going to start off with providing a framework for not the first task in the battery of the oral Matura tasks, which is describing a picture. It comes as a third part, as far as I remember correctly. So we're going to address or look at the question of what language is recurring and predictable in the picture description task. In other words, are there any lexical structures or are there any conversational structures that the students should learn and will be using irrespective of the picture, irrespective of the photograph that they will get. How much of the language is picture dependent? In other words, how much of the language is going to be unpredictable for the learners? To what extent lexical richness contributes to successful execution of the task? So this is where vocabulary comes into play. How to spice up your production with the richness of vocabulary. Obviously, when we're describing the picture, there will be different aspects that we're all familiar with. So we have the opening of the task. In the picture I can see, the picture shows, the picture presents, the picture depicts. We all know that. There will be what I call the perspective, telling the examiner what we can see in the foreground, in the background, at the bottom of the picture, at the top of the picture, in the top left-hand corner, and so on. This, however, I don't find particularly useful, I have to say. It probably will be useful for weaker learners or for those who do not feel particularly comfortable and safe when it comes to using English. But when you think of, from your perspective, when you think of a picture description activity and talking about the perspective, I believe it's really rare, but still we have it because it could be used by the learners. Then we've got the characters, usually more than one, most typically more than one, and the phrases like the people in the picture are probably, and then who they are, family members, friends, classmates, co-workers, strangers. Probably some other options will be there, but I believe that this covers 90% of the possibilities. What are they wearing? So this is where the vocabulary concerning clothes comes into play. How they look or they seem happy, focused, uninterested, annoyed. Another portion of vocabulary here would be adjectives. Then we're describing the actions. They are probably doing something. They look as if they were doing something, they appear to be doing something, or they seem to be doing something. And now I mentioned at the beginning that I'm not going to be talking a lot about grammar, but there are certain grammatical structures which I think are extremely important in the oral part of Matura. One of those structures is modality. So instead of being categorical and saying they are doing something, we could teach the students to say they are probably doing something, or they look as if they were doing something. It's not being categorical, but also it makes a better impression on the examiners. So it is one of those strategies I'm going to be referring to in this webinar that contribute to the final grade for the oral part of the exam. Then how to present opinions, because picture description has to be personal and picture description has to contain the opinion of the candidate. So again, if you look at those three examples, they seem. Again, my suggestion would be to teach them how to express their opinion using modality. Again, not being categorical, but trying to be kind of vaguish. So they seem to be enjoying themselves or absolutely enjoying themselves, or they don't seem to be enjoying themselves. That whole sentence might be quite handy. You can see the smiles on the faces. They seem focused on the task or totally focused on the task. You can tell from their faces. They seem tired or they seem really tired. You can tell from their faces. So we've got modality here. And also we've got some adverbs like absolutely, totally, really. Small words but having a big value because adding a lot to the impression that the candidate might leave on the examiners. And then we could add some personal touch. So on top of expressing the opinion, we could be a little, or we could teach the candidates to be a little bit more personal. So you just express your opinion on a particular photograph, on a particular picture, or the situation that the picture presents. And then you just say that you would like to be in their shoes, or you wouldn't like to be in their shoes. And again, here we could just provide the students with a ready-made block to be used towards the end of the picture description, something they could learn by heart, something they, I think, should use at the end of the exam. I'm not sure I'd like to be in their shoes. I'd rather do something different instead, or be somewhere else instead. For example, again, vocabulary has to be there. But it's just my opinion, your mileage may vary. You could say a nice idiom at the end. Why not? Or, I don't think I'd like to be in such a situation myself. I'm just not keen on something, vocab. Instead, I'd rather do something different, for example, vocab. But it's just me. I believe many people would find it attractive or even amusing. Again, these two sentences or closing elements of the picture description task, this is something that we could give the learners as ready-made blocks. Because if you say something like that towards the end, it could have the jaw-dropping effects on the examiners. If you can say something like that, you just must be good. And then finishing off with a roundup. Anyway, the picture is rather positive in its tone. All things considered, the picture shows real life. All in all, the picture is amusing and funny. Whatever the students say, if they started with anyway, or all things considered, or all in all, or any other discourse markers, then again, the impression on the examiners will not be something to be sniffed at, really. So putting it all together, if we look at the picture that was at one of the initial slides, and if we think of the language that I was presenting to you, using those blocks actually covers, I'd say, 90% of the pictures that the students might be confronted with at the exam. We've got the people doing something. We can express some opinions, we could add some personal touch, and we can close this with this anyway, whatever you want to say at the end. So those examples of language, which I was showing you earlier, they actually constitute a big block which might be used as a kind of, if you will pardon my saying so, gestalt for describe any picture, because, as I said, probably 95% or more photographs would qualify to be described using the language I was referring to earlier. You could also encourage your students to be inventive. So, again, looking at the photograph, you could choose any photograph you have in your laptop that you think will qualify as a picture description task for Matura. You could choose a photograph from the course book, and the idea is to encourage the learners to come up with either possible or impossible identities of the people in the picture. So they're trying to kind of to be inventive, to think and perform kind of beyond the picture description activity per se. Then you can add some language for them, a box with how to express opinions, or a box with some model expressions just to spice up the production, just to make sure it's all kind of nicely glued together, and that it's not just a sequence of sentences, but that it's something that is coherent, something that is logical, and something that constitutes some kind of entity. So an example picture, we've got two people doing Nordic walking, and well, the students are simply thinking of what the man is doing, who he is, and the same about the woman. And in the description, they can include this information just to be perhaps more inventive, just to be perhaps more amusing, just to show that to the examination panel that they are able to go beyond a mere picture description. Then I think another important element is to help the students in creating a mental framework for the task, for the picture description task. And what I mean by the mental framework, if you look at this picture, again taken from My Perspectives, very nice pictures, by the way. You know, it's National Geographic, so they just have to have good pictures. And what we're encouraging the students to do is to think of some unusual questions, some usual questions, any questions that would pertain to this picture. Like, why is he wearing sunglasses? Or why is he in a ball? Or why is the ball in the street? Or is it not in the street because you could see the walls? Why are the small round objects on the ball? Why is he alone? Why is he looking up? Etc, etc. So the idea of creating this mental framework is basically to make sure that when the exam time comes, they do not have to think about what to say about a particular picture. If you've done it a few times, asking or encouraging the learners to come up with the questions, then probably when it comes to the actual exam, while describing the picture, they'll be automatically trying to answer the questions that will be somewhere in the back of their heads. So in the classroom, you encourage them to write down 4 or 5 questions for a picture that you've chosen. Then in pairs, they compare the questions and try to put them in a logical sequence. Then you introduce to them some linking expressions and ask them to prepare a description by answering the questions and using those linking expressions. So it is not really describing a picture, but it's addressing the questions that help the learners in describing the picture. So hence creating a mental framework for them, something that they could use more instinctively at the exam. Then it's not just a picture description in this part, but it's also the questions that follow. So with the photograph, you can encourage the learners to suggest the questions that may follow the picture description task, for example, in the course book or from your photograph inventory. Then you put those suggestions up on the board and discuss with the learners which of the questions could be good candidates for exam questions and why, because some of them will qualify and some of them will not qualify for obvious reasons. So it's more like a kind of workshopy thing that you do in the classroom with the learners, something which is learner-generated, something that comes from the learners, something that you do, at least at this stage, for analytical reasons. We're trying to analyze the quality of the questions. We'll see which questions will be good candidates for the exam, which questions should be disqualified, just to give the learners some kind of feel of what kind of questions to expect. Once you've done this workshopy part, then in pairs or in small groups, the students invent three, I think is enough, 3 questions that might follow the picture description activity. So now they're trying to think about the possible questions. Know your enemy, somebody said, quite wisely. So if you can predict the kinds of questions, it's going to be much easier for you to address them. Once you've come up with your 3 questions, then you exchange your questions with another parent or another group, and you just perform the activity. Then you take another set from yet another group, and it could just go on for as long as the teacher wants it to. In the course book, in My Perspectives, sorry, the teacher's book, not the course book, in the teacher's book to My Perspective, there's lots and lots of extra materials I'd like to draw attention to. There's also materials for speaking, and there's a quite a big portion of those activities that focus on describing a picture. And I would like to show you one of them. We've got 2 pictures and we've got 2 descriptions. As you can see, the descriptions are gapped, and the learners have to read them and they have to fill the gaps with the appropriate expressions. So if you just do it the way the teacher's book suggests, and then once they've done it, once you've checked it with the learners, you try to be a little bit more analytical, try to get them to be a little bit more analytical with the task, and you try to show them which elements in the picture description activity are actually repeating or repetitive or recurrent. So the ones I have chosen for you, if I was your teacher and if you were my students, I would definitely be paying attention to relative clauses. A man, who? People, who? A hat, which? Who is playing, who are watching, which is lying. So this, except for modality, seems to be yet another important structure to be practiced for the picture description activity. Then I would probably draw attention to one of the, because you're likely to have more than one person in the picture. So one of the spectators, one of the people, one of the classmates, one of the workers, whatever, and then the others. I would draw attention to modality, and you know that I would, because I drew attention to that earlier. The guitarist seems really happy about this. I would also draw attention to nice expressions. I don't know how to classify them, but I just call them nice expressions. In this particular text, I've got, but from his or her gesture, I can tell that. And this could be used as another block, building block for the students, or some sort of semi-block. But from his or her gesture, but from his or her facial expression, but from his or her face, but from his or her posture, one can tell that. So once you've done it with the learners, once you've shown them what kind of lexical structures, what kinds of expressions or grammatical structures might be relevant and useful, then you give them the second text from the activity and you ask them to do something similar. They could do it in pairs or they could do it individually, and they check in pairs. And then if we look at the second picture, probably at the beginning I wouldn't expect my students to give me lots of the expressions that I would expect them to. But it comes in time with time. So if you give them more practice, then they'll get better and better and better at it. Again, we've got a man who is looking at a painting, probably, in a place that looks like. Yeah, not is, but looks like. So again, we've got a non-categorical statement here. Again, we've got an example of modality. The man is probably in his 20s, describing a person. There have to be some people in the picture. So she is probably in her 40s, he is probably in his 50s, she's probably in her 20s, and so on and so on. Very useful. Then again, seems, modality. We can also see as a nice discourse marker a relative clause, which makes me think. And not just a relative clause, but a clause with a nice lexical feel to it, yeah, which makes me think instead of I think. Yeah, the students go, which makes me thinks that blah blah blah. So if you follow my Perspectives teacher's book, and if you use the photocopiables at the back, and there's plenty of them, then they serve as a very nice springboard for practicing picture description, not just as a mere picture description as we know it, but as analysis, as focus on language, especially vocabulary, focus on those building blocks, and probably as a result building confidence in the learners. They can do it. And then when it comes to the actual speaking, describe the photograph and answer the question. If you have all those strategies, if you have the tools to do it, then it becomes really a piece of cake for the learners. We've got two people. One of them is in her 40s probably. The other is a bit younger. They are wearing this. They are probably communicating using sign language if your students are good enough, or if they know this particular chunk, and so on and so forth. And then having done this batch of activities I was referring to earlier, then the three questions is something that is or could be somehow predicted by the learners, and if it's predicted or if it's predictable, it will be much easier for them to address those three questions. Sorry, a sip of water for me. So we're moving on to the first part. We're not going chronological. Started with number 3, now it's number 1. Something I call introductory chitchat, or the part which is not really assessed, but which is very important, because this is the first chance for the learners to make a good impression on the examiners. And if you make a good impression at the start, then it's easier for you to continue. So I thought, about this set of questions that constitute this, what I call introductory chit-chat. You could use it, maybe not at every lesson, but in most lessons as a warming up activity. So just choose 2 or 3 questions, ask random learners, and as such give them practice in what this part will look like. So asking those oral Matura introductory questions to random students as a warmer, maybe not in each lesson, but in most lessons. Then you could use those as fillers as well. I believe that most teachers will have those lists of possible questions that could be asked at this stage. So again, you could choose 2 or 3, put the students in pairs and get them to practice questions and answers from this part. If you'd like to go a little bit beyond it, again, I would like to draw attention to My Perspectives teacher's book, where you will have some suggestions for activities which make use of this particular stage. But it's not just asking questions, but it's asking questions and practicing vocabulary as well. So we've got an interview activity with student A and student B. We've got 8 questions and 2 gaps that could be used for students' own questions or something extra. And as you could see at the bottom, there are boxes with vocabulary to be practiced. So what you're doing is that you're giving the students a chance to perform this introductory chit-chat part from the beginning of the exam, but also you're practicing the vocabulary from the lesson or from the units. And as you can see, the phrases here will vary from easier ones or more basic ones through to more kind of advanced ones, like hurt yourself doing something, or enjoy watching, or offer to buy, or arrange to meet, or prevent someone from doing something. So you see that what you're practicing here is lexical structures or verbs that are used with either the ing ending or the infinitives. And this brings us to the second part of the exam, which is the role play activity. And I would like to focus on speaking lessons from My Perspectives and useful language function boxes from My Perspectives. But also, after that, I'm going to show you some photocopyable materials which are included in the teacher's book, because I find them really, really useful and with a great potential. So, focusing on speaking lessons first, what we see here, the methodology that we see here is that we're grading the level of difficulty. That usually in the speaking part, in the role-play speaking part, there will be 3 different tasks, and they will vary in terms of how difficult they are. Starting off with something easier, something which creates some sort of structural framework for the learners, then moving on to something more open-ended, and finally finishing off with a personal touch. I'm going to illustrate that in a moment, so you will see what I mean. So this personal touch will have some level of personalization, and also with each role-play speaking lesson, the tools are important, or those linguistic devices are important, and they are obviously provided. So a lesson from Unit 2, 2F speaking. As you can see, or maybe not, there are 5 different activities, and the useful language box, those 5 activities constitute a task, really, and the first 2 of them are listening. So they serve as a model. We're not going to be looking at them. We'll start off activity number 3, in which the students have to work in pairs and they have to complain about something. I mean, one of them is complaining and the other is receiving the complaint and has to somehow sort it out. So we've got a hotel guest, and a receptionist. And they have to discuss the details of the complaint, the reasons why the problem occurred, the consequences of the problem, and the possible ways to fix the problem. So this is the structure. This is the discourse structure, or this is the language structure for the learners. After they've done it, we move on to something a little bit more challenging. So in this one, in the activity that follows, we give them 4 situations from which they're supposed to choose 2, and then to role play those 2 situations with a partner using the expressions I'm going to show you in a moment, but also using the discourse structure which was presented in the previous task. So the previous task was kind of laying the foundations for the role play activity. This one is more open-ended. This one is more kind of resembling the real exam task for the students. And then we've got the personal. That's something probably the most ambitious, but something that adds value to this activity. They have to work in pairs. They have to think back about the situations in the previous activity, in activity number 4, and think about which of the 4 is the most serious and why. And they've got the questions that follow. So why are we doing that? We're doing that to add some personal touch to the whole sequence of activities, but also to show them that if they are doing the Matura one, the role play activity, the number 2 activity in the exam, it would be nice to kind of recap with providing your kind of personal perspective to it, just to close this part of the exam. And the useful language I was referring to, so those linguistic devices, showing understanding, disagreeing politely, preparing the listener for bad news. Again, those building blocks which are important and necessary for carrying out this particular task, but also any task in which those would be useful. And again, the extras from the teacher's book, lots and lots of them. I have chosen regrets. I've had a few. This is something which kind of borders between role play and extended turns, which is the last part of the exam. And I'm not going to talk you through the whole thing, but the procedure is explained. The teacher has to read the lines that constitute a problem, and she does it by focusing on 2 at a time. 2 at a time. So if only my mobile phone was working, I wish I hadn't got out of the car. And then the students in pairs have to start speculating about the potential problem. Then after about a minute, she continues with the next 2, and the students continue for another minute, then the next 2, and the students continue for another minute, and then after all 6 clues, you just tell them to decide what the full story is. So on the one hand, we've got interaction, and on the other hand, we've got something like production or the extended turn. So there are both types of discourse involved, the role play part and the extended production or extended turn part of the exam, which is the last one, with the questions that follow. And when we talk about those extended turns, there's interaction and there's production. And also there's a lot of focus on linguistic devices which are necessary for the task to be carried out successfully. And again, looking at another activity from the book, another speaking activity from the book. Again, we've got listening at the beginning, listening as a model. This time there's the first 3 activities, then the 4th one is the matching activity, and then 5, 6 and 7 are proper speaking activities, where we start off with the interaction, so the students have to have a conversation with each other, one of them pretending to be one character, the other pretending to be the other character.
Then they work in group, and this is where it's getting interesting. They work in groups, A and B. They have to imagine that the government in your country wants to change the legal age for one of the things in exercise 1. So you've got to go back to your listening. Group A make a list of the reasons in favor of this proposal. Group B make a list of reasons why it might not be a good idea. Yeah? So we're just thinking in terms of for or against it, depending on whether we are in Group A or Group B. And then the students work in pairs, and they have to present their arguments. So this is where the extended turn comes into play. So again, this type of activity has got some elements of the second task from Matura, so the interaction part and the role play part, and also the last one with the extended turn. And obviously the useful language is given, so here I've chosen causes and reasons, which isn't presented in this lesson. That's the reason, the purpose of something is to, therefore, consequently, nice expressions that help you structure your performance, but also leave a good impression on the examiners, which is as important, if not more important, in the light of the exam. And again, the extras from the teacher's book, 2 types which I have chosen, but again, if you're interested, you might just have a look and see what's in them. We've got topic elaboration and class debate, where topic elaboration is basically the activity that we used to do as learners, so talking about topics or agreeing or disagreeing on a particular topic, and that's what the activity suggests here. Or the second one, class debate, with the instructions on the left and the materials, the photocopiables for the students on the right. So it just shows you how to structure the debate, and we've got the materials for the students to perform the debate, and it all helps them in producing those extended turns that are typical of part 4. Of the oral part.
So that's all from me. Thank you very much for being with us, and I do hope that you find some of the activities and ideas, well, if not attractive, then at least useful, perhaps in the future, if not now. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to the 3rd episode in the series, devoted to reading, and the webinar's title is Reading Textually, so you're more than welcome to join us for that one. Also, I would like to leave you with the final slide with a contact to Nova Era reps, just in case you're interested in getting more information about my perspectives, perhaps arrange for the meeting with a rep, or perhaps get a complimentary copy of the book. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll see you for the 3rd episode. Bye.